Missing and murdered Indigenous women. The broad issue. Indigenous women are going missing and are being murdered. Many of these cases have been hidden from the broader society. The vast majority of cases in the U.S., including another 2,000 in Canada, remain unsolved. About 1,500 American Indian and Alaska Native people have been recorded missing across the country. Indigenous women are murdered at a rate 10 times the national average, and more than 1.5 million Indigenous women have experienced violence in their lifetime. These statistics just show us how big of an issue this really is. Indigenous women and girls are dying, with so many of their cases and stories remaining unsolved and untold. For example, the National Crime Information Center reported that in 2016, there were 5,712 reports of missing American Indian and Alaska Native women and girls, while the U.S. Department of Justice's Federal Missing Persons Database only logged 116 cases. The majority of these murders are committed by non-Native people on Native-owned land. The lack of communication, combined with jurisdictional issues between state, local, federal, and tribal law enforcement, make it nearly impossible to begin the investigating process. Along with that, murder is the third leading cause of death among Indigenous women, and the rates of violence on reservations can be up to 10 times higher than the national average. Here is a video on missing and murdered Indigenous women. Here are some more statistics based on this issue. More than 4 out of 5 Indigenous women have experienced violence, with more than half of these women experiencing sexual violence. Less than half of Indigenous women have been stalked in their lifetime. Indigenous women are 1.7 more likely than Anglo-American women to experience violence, and Indigenous women are 2 times more likely to be raped than Anglo-American white women. Connection to the current issue. I chose to connect my issue to the Inuit community, a Native community in Canada. Canada, in general, struggles with this issue very much. The Native Women's Association of Canada created a database of missing and murdered Aboriginal women and girls, collecting information on 582 cases. 67% are murder cases, 20% are cases of missing women or girls, 4% are cases of suspicious death, deaths regarding as natural or accidental by police, but considered suspicious by family or community. And 9% are cases where the nature of the case is unknown, such as it being unclear whether the woman was murdered, went missing, or died under suspicious circumstances. With this being such an issue, the Inuit community started a National Inuit Action Plan. The National Inuit Action Plan was developed by the National Inuit Working Group on Missing and Murdered Inuit Women and Girls. These Inuit women and girls face challenges and threats to their safety, such as being targeted for violence, abduction, and trafficking. Implementation of the National Inuit Action Plan is contingent on governments respecting and supporting the right of Inuit to self-determination. Remedying the systemic problems that contribute to violence against Inuit women and girls requires governments and ILCOs to enact major new policy changes that are enabled by the development of new areas of jurisdiction. Improving the overall quality of life for Inuit women and girls can only be achieved through the sustained and genuine collaborative action between all governments and the Inuit community. Implementation will require governments and Inuit to broker the partnerships required to enact coordinated, effective, and impactful measures for preventing violence. Preventing violence against Inuit women and girls requires governments and Inuit to break intergenerational cycles of violence by addressing the systemic challenges known to increase the likelihood of violence. The National Inuit Action Plan also helps out in areas such as shelters and housing. The Inuit has been experiencing a housing crisis in some regions of the Inuit community for more than half a century, causing crowding and homelessness and contributing to the high prevalence of family violence in Inuit communities. It also covers anti-racism and reconciliation. Systemic racism and discrimination contribute to violence against Inuit women and girls. Curbing systemic racism and discrimination are critical to addressing the conditions that contribute to violence. Any and all forms of violence against Inuit women and girls are unacceptable and must end. Inuit women and girls are more likely to experience violence than other women and girls in Canada, and the impacts of violence reverberate throughout our society, and too often from one generation to the next. Challenges when addressing the issue. I think one of the biggest challenges when addressing this issue is that there's a widespread silence on it. There are issues stemming from the Indian Relocation Act and federal policies. Many Native Americans do not live on tribal lands or reservations, specifically only 22%, where when someone goes missing, the community and the tribal law enforcement band together in search efforts. 78% of America's Native population lives off of the reservation, with 60% of those residing on an urban area. Cities offer few ties to Native cultures, communities, and tribal law enforcement. For years, federal agencies have had extremely limited record-keeping and uncoordinated attempts to address these crimes. Advocates have long complained about the lack of comprehensive state and federal data on missing and murdered Native Americans, and they believe poor record-keeping, racial misclassification, and adverse relationships between tribal governments and outside law enforcement have led to an underreporting of cases. A report focused on the corridor between Northern California and the border with Oregon examined 105 cases of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls from that region and found that 62% of cases were never included in any official missing persons database. 74% of cases have no public documentation related to manner of death, and 56% of cases don't mention or make public the victim's tribal affiliation. These kinds of cases involving missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls have been put on the back burner for years. People don't pay attention to Native women the way they do for American white women. This issue is one of the many that Indigenous and Native people struggle with, and we need to find a way to stop it.